She crashed through a $15,000 window at 3 in the morning, bleeding and desperate, straight into the private bar of the most dangerous man in Chicago, Dante Ravencroft. The name that made bartenders whisper and grown men tremble. He controlled 37 businesses and, according to rumors, pieces of men's souls. She expected a bullet. What she got instead was a question that changed everything. Who hurt your face? Not, why are you here? Not, how dare you? But who hurt your face? She was a thief running from her own trainer who wanted her dead. He was a mafia king who already knew her name, her job, her fighting record, and the secret she thought no one would ever discover. What happens when the most wanted woman in Chicago's underground falls into the arms of a man everyone fears, and discovers that he's been watching her all along? This story will teach you that sometimes safety hides behind the most dangerous masks, and love arrives exactly when you're too broken to expect it. Sometimes, the person everyone fears most becomes the only one who truly sees you. If stories about finding strength in unexpected places speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss another powerful story. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever found help from the most unlikely source? And if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Now, let's begin. The sound of shattered glass screamed under my boots. Every piece reflected the yellow streetlights that bled through the entrance of the bar. The world turned fuzzy at the edges, and the sharp taste of blood coated my tongue. I had just crashed through that window. I staggered past it, deeper into the silence of Dante's nightcap. This was the most private club in Chicago's South Loop. All around me, rich mahogany and expensive leather booths sat empty. They probably cost more than I made in a whole year. I did not belong here. I knew that with the same certainty that I knew my ribs were fractured. But Marcus and his men were still prowling the streets for me. This was the only place on the entire block with a light still on in the back office at 3 in the morning. My left eye was swelling closed. The skin on my knuckles was torn open from the fight I had barely escaped. Blood dripped from a cut above my eyebrow, staining the perfect hardwood floor. You have 5 seconds to tell me why you destroyed a $15,000 imported Italian window. If I do not like your answer, I will put a bullet right between your eyes. The voice emerged from the darkness by the bar. It was as smooth as old whiskey, and far more dangerous. I spun around to face the sound. My hands came up to fight, even though the pain in my side was a roaring fire. That is when a man stepped out of the shadows, and my ability to breathe vanished. It was Dante Ravencroft. Every single bartender, bouncer, and server in Chicago knew his name. They spoke it with a mixture of worship and pure fear. He controlled 37 businesses in the city, from small neighborhood bars to exclusive rooftop lounges. The rumors claimed he also owned parts of men's souls. I had worked at 3 separate bars before I found a job at Murphy's Pub in Pilsen. Every one of the owners gave the same advice. Do not ever cross Dante Ravencroft. Do not ever owe Dante Ravencroft. And most importantly, do not ever think about stealing from Dante Ravencroft. He was taller than I thought he would be, maybe 6'3". The shoulders on him strained the material of his crisp white dress shirt. The top 3 buttons were open, showing a hint of olive skin and the black line of a tattoo. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms covered in more ink. Dark hair was falling over his forehead, and his eyes. They were the color of dark espresso, deep and impossible to read as they scanned my body with a predator's intensity. Those eyes narrowed when they focused on my face. An emotion crossed his features, but it was gone before I could understand it. I asked you a question. His voice had changed. The lethal edge was gone, replaced by something I did not recognize. He moved with a smooth grace from behind the bar. I saw the handgun tucked in the back of his pants. A Rolex watch on his wrist glinted in the dim light. Who hurt your face? It was not, why are you here? Or, how dare you break into my club? It was, who hurt your face? That question struck me with more force than the punch Marcus had landed an hour before. I am sorry about your window, I said, the words thick with the taste of fresh blood. I will pay for it. I just had to find a place to. The entire room started to spin. I reached out for a nearby booth to keep from falling. I needed to hide. In 3 long steps, Dante crossed the space between us and grabbed my elbow just before I hit the floor. His grip was surprisingly gentle. It felt completely wrong for a man who carried a deadly weapon so casually. Standing this close, I could smell his cologne. It was an expensive, woody scent that made me want to relax against him, even as every instinct screamed that he was danger. Sit, he ordered, guiding me to a leather stool at the bar. Do not move. He vanished into a back room. I thought about running. I really should have run, but my legs were trembling. The adrenaline that had kept me going was gone, leaving only exhaustion. Besides, where could I possibly go? Marcus knew every hidden gym, every secret fighting ring in the city. For 3 years, he was my trainer. He taught me everything I knew about fighting. And now he wanted me dead for stealing from him. But I had not actually stolen anything. I had borrowed it. I took small amounts from the betting pools over 6 months. I was careful and precise. It was just enough to pay for my mother's medical bills when her insurance refused to cover the one therapy that was actually saving her life. I was going to pay it all back. I had already started putting money back from my last 5 fights, but someone must have told him, or maybe Marcus finally checked his accounting. And tonight, he had trapped me in the locker room at Sal's gym. He brought 3 of his biggest men with him. I managed to fight my way free. Years of training mixed with pure desperation is a very strong combination. But I did not get away clean. My lip was split open, a black eye was forming, the gash on my head would not stop bleeding, and my ribs made breathing feel like inhaling sharp glass. I ran for 6 blocks through South Loop, Chicago at 3 in the morning. Marcus and his crew were right behind me, shouting for my blood like a pack of wolves chasing their prey. Dante came back carrying a first aid kit. It looked too professional for a simple bar. He placed it on the counter next to me, along with a bottle of very expensive whiskey. He poured a measure of it into a heavy crystal glass and offered it to me. Drink this. It will take the edge off the pain. I accepted the glass. Our fingers touched for a second. I drank the whiskey in a single gulp. It burned all the way down my throat, but a pleasant warmth spread through my chest, pushing back the ache in my side for a moment. Dante just watched me with those piercing dark eyes. Then, he took a clean towel and poured whiskey straight onto the cloth. This is going to sting, he stated. He moved to stand right in front of me between my knees, but we have to clean that cut before it gets infected. He pressed the towel to my eyebrow. I sucked in a sharp breath and my fingers tightened on the edge of the bar. Dante's free hand came up and gently cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking the bone beneath my eye. He held me perfectly still with a startling tenderness. "Who hurt your face?" He said each word with slow, careful precision. I finally understood that he was furious. He was not angry at me. He was furious at the person who did this to me. "Why do you care?" I asked, forcing myself to look him in the eye. "You have no idea who I am. I just destroyed your window and bled on your expensive floors." "I know that you are Sailor Thorne," he replied, carefully dabbing at the wound. "You are 28 years old and you work as a bartender at Murphy's in Pilsen. Although Connor told me you quit last week, you are an underground fighter with a good record. About 30 wins in 3 years. You fight left-handed, but you can use your right when you need to. And you have been taking money from Marcus Donovan's betting operation to fund your mother's cancer care at Northwestern Memorial." All the blood rushed from my head. He knew. This man knew absolutely everything about me, and I was trapped in his bar at 3 in the morning with no way out. "If you know all of that," I whispered, "then you have to know that I am a dead woman as soon as I leave this place." Marcus does not forgive people, and he never forgets. He is convinced I stole $50,000 from him. "Did you?" "I borrowed $37,460. It was the exact amount I had written down in a notebook under my bed." I was going to repay every single dollar. That money is the only reason my mother is still alive. Her cancer is gone. So yes, I took it, and I would do it again in a second. Dante stared at my face for what felt like a long time. Then he reached for a butterfly bandage and skillfully closed the cut above my eye. His movements were still so gentle and exact. These were the hands of a man who understood deliberate violence, but was choosing to show care instead. Marcus Donovan is a small man who thinks he is a king, Dante said, and his voice became a low, dark promise. He manages one illegal gym and believes that gives him real power. He likes to hurt women who cannot defend themselves, and then he calls himself a businessman. I can defend myself, I said, which was probably not a smart thing to say in my condition. I escaped, did I not? The barest hint of a smile touched Dante's mouth for just a second. Yes, you did. And while doing so, you broke into my club, shattered a very expensive window, and bled all over my floor. This means you now owe me, Sailor Thorn. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. Being in debt to Marcus got me into this disaster. I could not even begin to guess what a debt to a man like Dante Ravencroft would cost me. I have nothing left to offer you. Every dollar I have went to my mother's medical care. I am not interested in your money. He finished applying the bandage and then took my hands to look at my split knuckles. He turned them over with that same surprising gentleness. These need to be cleaned as well. You will have scars. I already have plenty of scars. I know. His thumb moved over the old faded marks on my hands. They were evidence of 100 different fights and 1,000 hours of training. Let me ask you something. Would you rather be in my debt or in Marcus's debt? The question just hung there in the quiet bar, filled with meaning that I was too tired and hurt to fully comprehend. Just then, I heard shouts from the street. Men were calling out, searching. Marcus and his crew were still out there hunting me. Dante heard them as well. The muscle in his jaw clenched tight. When he looked back at me, his expression was purely predatory. It was a look that made me understand exactly why people said his name in fearful whispers. Stay right here, he commanded. Get behind the bar, get on the floor, and do not make a single sound. It does not matter what you might hear. Do you understand? I quickly slid from the stool and ducked down behind the heavy, polished wood. Dante walked toward the broken window. He moved with the kind of assurance that belongs to a man who has never once doubted his own power. I peeked through the spaces between the bottles on the shelf and watched him step into the doorway. The streetlights made him a dark silhouette. Gentlemen, his voice was perfectly clear in the night air, both smooth and filled with menace. I think you are searching for something that now belongs to me. I would suggest you just keep on walking. She came in here. That was Marcus's voice, rough and angry from years of smoking and yelling. We followed her blood trail. Give her to us, and we will be on our way. The only thing I am going to give you, Dante said, and I heard the clean click of a gun being readied, is a warning. You have 10 seconds to vanish from my street before I make you vanish for good. After that, I will be making calls, and by morning, every underground gym in Chicago is going to know you put your hands on a woman and called it business. There was silence, then the sound of footsteps hurrying away, and Marcus's voice shouting back. You are making a mistake, Ravencroft. She took something from me. 9, Dante counted, his voice cold and final. 8, 7. The footsteps got faster, fading away. Dante stood in the doorway for another long minute before he finally put his weapon away and came back into the bar. He found me still hiding behind the counter, my whole body shaking now that the fear was wearing off. Come out, he said softly. They are gone. They will not be back. I got to my feet, which felt unsteady, and grabbed the bar to stay upright. Why did you do that? You do not know who I am. You said yourself that I owe you now. Dante walked back over to me, and this time when his hand touched my face, his fingers moved along my jaw, tilting my head up so I was forced to look into his eyes. The gentleness was now mixed with something possessive. Someone hurt what is mine, he said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "That is not something I ever allow." "I am not yours," I whispered, even as my body leaned toward him, looking for the safety he was offering, even knowing he was likely the most dangerous man in the city. "Not yet," he agreed, and his thumb brushed against my split bottom lip with a tenderness that was heartbreaking. "But you will be, Sailor Thorn. By the time I finish protecting you, by the time I hunt down every man who believed he could touch you, you will know exactly what it means to belong to Dante Ravencraftoft." His words should have scared me. Instead, as I stood there bleeding and broken in his bar at 3 in the morning, with his hands holding my face like I was something precious instead of a fighter who had just shattered his property, the only thing I felt was relief. Maybe safety, I realized, comes in forms you do not expect. Dante led me through his bar to the office in the back, his hand on the small of my back, its warmth soaking through my blood-stained tank top. The office was precisely what I would have imagined. It had leather furniture, dark wood, walls lined with expensive alcohol I could not identify, and a huge desk covered in neat piles of cash. He had been counting money at 3 in the morning, I understood. That explained why the lights had been on. "Sit." He motioned toward the leather couch, and then he locked the office door behind us. "I need to look at your ribs." "I am fine," I argued, but even I could tell how thin that lie was. Every breath felt as if someone was stabbing me with hot knives. Dante simply raised an eyebrow, walked to a cabinet, and took out a medical kit that looked like it belonged in an emergency vehicle. I have been around enough fights to know the difference between being fine and having cracked ribs. Shirt up or off, it is your choice. My face grew hot despite the situation. This is already the most surreal night of my entire life. The last thing I need is... If you had broken into my bar bleeding, I would be checking your injuries the exact same way, Dante said plainly. "I do not allow people to die on my property. It is bad for my business. Now, shirt." With shaking hands, I peeled off my tank top, wincing when the movement pulled on my hurt ribs. I had on a sports bra underneath at least, but I had never felt more exposed than I did in that moment, sitting in Dante Ravencraftoff's office, half-clothed and vulnerable, while he examined me with clinical intensity. He knelt down before me, his hands hovering just above my skin. "I am going to press lightly on each rib. Tell me if the pain becomes sharp." His fingers were warm and surprisingly careful as they probed along my rib cage. I bit down on my lip hard to stop myself from crying out when he touched the damaged area on my left side. "Cracked, maybe broken," he confirmed, as he reached for an elastic bandage. "I will wrap them, but you are going to need x-rays. There is a doctor I know who works at Northwestern. He owes me several favors. I will have him meet us at his private clinic in an hour." "I cannot afford a doctor," I said softly. "All of my money went to pay for my mother's treatment." Dante's hands stopped their work, and when he looked up at me, a fierce intensity burned in his dark eyes. "Did you hear me say anything about money? I said he owes me. That means this costs you nothing, except for having to accept my help. Why are you helping me?" The question rushed out before I could hold it back. "You could have just let Marcus take me. You could have phoned the police and had me arrested for breaking your window. Instead of all that, you are wrapping my ribs and offering to drive me to a doctor. I do not understand it." Dante finished securing the bandage, his hands resting on my skin for just a second longer than necessary. "When I was 16, my sister Lucia broke into a restaurant kitchen at 2 in the morning. She was running from her boyfriend, who had decided that hitting women made him a man. The chef found her bleeding and frightened, and instead of calling the police, he hid her in the walk-in freezer and called my father. He stood up, took a clean shirt from a closet, and gave it to me. It was his, gigantic on my body, but it smelled like his cologne and was infinitely cleaner than my own blood-soaked tank top. "My father made that boyfriend disappear," Dante went on, his voice turning cold and final. "And he taught me that there are some lines that you do not cross. Hurting women is one of those lines. Letting a woman bleed out because you are more concerned with money or your reputation is another. You remind me of Lucia. You have the same fire, The same desperation, the same willingness to break windows and deal with the fallout rather than let some bastard break you. I pulled his shirt on, the soft material swallowing me whole. What happened to your sister? She runs my businesses now, married a stockbroker, has 3 children, and could make a grown man cry with her accounting skills. A true smile touched his lips, transforming his face from dangerous to completely devastating. She is safe because somebody helped her when she needed it the most. Now, I am helping you. You said I owe you, I reminded him, pulling my wet hair out from inside his shirt collar. Nothing comes without a price, especially not from men like you. Men like me? Dante moved over to his desk, leaning back against it with his arms crossed. In the dim light of the office, he looked every bit the Mafia boss that people whispered about. He was powerful, dangerous, and in total control. What do you think you know about men like me, sailor? I know you own half of the bars in Chicago. I know that people are terrified of you. I know you likely have connections that could make someone like me vanish without a trace. I met his gaze directly, despite the fear twisting in my gut. And I know that men who have power always want something in return. Smart girl. He pushed off the desk, walking toward me with a predator's grace. Yes, I do want something. I want to know every single detail of Marcus Donovan's operation. Every fighter he controls, every underground ring he operates, every dirty police officer he has paid off, and every single cent he has skimmed from other people's work. I want to know everyone who was in that locker room tonight, everyone who put their hands on you, and everyone who helped him chase you through my streets. His eyes were like black fire as he came to a stop directly in front of me. And then I want you to stand and watch while I take everything from him. His gyms, his rings, his reputation, his pride. I am going to make sure that Marcus Donovan never forgets the night he made the mistake of touching what belongs to me. I do not belong to you, I said, but my voice was breathless. Not yet, he repeated his earlier words, and his hand came up to touch my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with a devastating gentleness. But you broke into my bar, Sailor Thorne. You chose my window, my sanctuary, my protection. Whether you knew it or not, you placed yourself inside my world, and I do not let go of what is mine. I should have pulled back. Everything about Dante Ravencraftoft was a warning sign. From his perfectly tailored clothes to his casual violence to the possessive way he touched me as if he had every right. But I had spent 3 years fighting in underground rings. 3 years listening to men bet on whether I would live to see the next round. 3 years handling trainers like Marcus, who saw me as nothing more than a product. Dante saw me as something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth keeping. Tell me about Marcus, he said, his voice dropping to a tone that was almost gentle. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him how I had started fighting at 25, desperate for money right after my mother's diagnosis. I explained how Marcus discovered me in Pilsen, winning fights in the back of bars, and made an offer to train me the right way. I told him how Marcus was professional at first, a decent man, until my wins became consistent and the betting money started pouring in. He took 60% of everything I earned, claiming it was the industry standard, and I was in no position to argue. I told Dante that I found the problems in Marcus's financial records 6 months ago, seeing he was skimming off several fighters and keeping the profits. That was when I began my own operation, cautiously taking money from the betting pools to cover my mother's experimental cancer treatments. I kept meticulous records, I explained, taking out my phone to show him the spreadsheet I had built. Every single cent I had taken was documented, along with every hospital payment and every fight where I had altered the totals. My plan was to repay it all after my mother went into remission, when I could concentrate on securing bigger prizes. Dante examined the spreadsheet with the intense focus of someone who understood both money and influence. This is very thorough. You have the transaction dates, the locations of the rings, and even the names of the bookmakers who were handling the bets. Marcus is careless. He likely had no idea you were documenting his every move. I'm a bartender, I replied with a small shrug that sent a sharp pain through my ribs. We are trained to notice the small details. Besides, I assumed that if he ever discovered what I was doing, I would need evidence that I was only recovering what he had already stolen from other fighters. You were not wrong to think that. Dante scrolled down my list of records, his expression hardening with each new line he read. Marcus has been operating these schemes in 3 separate gyms, taking money from fighters who put their trust in him. This information is more than enough to have him blacklisted from every underground fighting circuit in the Midwest. He glanced up at me, and a flicker of something that looked like admiration appeared in his eyes. You are much smarter than he ever realized, and braver. Most people would have disappeared the second they learned Marcus was crooked. Most people do not have mothers who are dying from cancer, I said in a quiet voice. I was prepared to do whatever it took to keep her alive, even if that meant stealing from a man who was already a thief. Dante placed my phone on the table and shifted closer, his hands resting on the couch on either side of me, effectively trapping me without making any physical contact. This is exactly what is going to happen next. You will stay here for the night, you can sleep on my couch, and tomorrow morning, we are going to visit a doctor I know. He will examine your ribs to ensure there is no serious damage, and he will provide you with something to manage the pain. And after that? I asked, intensely aware of his closeness, of the way his body heat felt like it was wrapping around me, like a warm blanket. After that, you are going to relocate to the apartment directly above this bar. It is currently empty, it comes completely furnished, and it is at least 10 times more secure than whatever rundown place you are currently in. You are going to start working for me, tending bar here in the daytime and helping me navigate the underground fight circuit in the evenings. I cannot just move in with you, I protested, my voice weak. People are going to talk. They will assume I am… What? My kept woman? My new employee? My latest investment? Dante's smile was both sharp and menacing. Let them assume whatever they want to. The only thing that is important is that Marcus and his associates will never be able to touch you again, because every person in Chicago is about to learn that you are now under my personal protection. And what exactly do you gain from this particular arrangement? I asked, doing my best to ignore the fluttering sensation in my stomach caused by the way he was looking at me. Dante's hand rose, his fingers weaving into my hair and tilting my head back until I was forced to look directly into his eyes. I get to see you recover. I get to train you the correct way, to teach you how to fight so you do not get yourself killed. I get access to all the information on Marcus's entire organization, and I will have the deep satisfaction of ruining a man who believes he can harm women in my city without consequence. His thumb gently brushed against my lower lip, and I felt the sensation resonate through my entire body. And in time, when you are finally ready, when you truly understand that I am not like the men who have hurt you in the past, I get you, entirely. There will be no more running away, no more fighting your battles by yourself, and no more having to choose between your own safety and your mother's health. You will belong to me, sailor, and I will personally ensure the whole city understands what happens to people who dare to touch what is mine. That is completely insane, I whispered. You barely even know who I am. I know what matters. I know that you would rather shatter windows than break a promise. I know you would fight your way past 3 grown men before you would ever consider giving up. I know you love your mother so much. You are willing to risk everything for her. For me, that is more than enough. He leaned closer, and for one heart-stopping second, I was certain he was going to kiss me. Instead, his lips gently touched my forehead, a gesture that felt both tender and possessive at the same time. Get some sleep, he murmured, his voice soft against my skin. Tomorrow, we will begin to dismantle Marcus Donovan's world, one piece at a time. And sailor, those men who laid their hands on you tonight, they are going to deeply regret that they ever touched you. I give you my word on that. He drew back, and the absence of his warmth left me feeling suddenly cold as he walked over to his desk. He took a blanket from a nearby closet and carefully draped it over me with a surprising gentleness. Sleep now. I will be right here working through the night. You are safe now. I should not have taken him at his word. I should never have trusted a mafia boss I had known for less than 2 hours. But as I curled myself up on his expensive leather couch, wrapped inside his blanket and wearing his shirt, listening to the steady sounds of him working, I felt more secure than I had felt in 3 long years. Perhaps Dante Ravencroft was a dangerous man. Maybe he was possessive and controlling, and precisely the type of man a person should run from. But he had looked at my bruised and broken face and asked who did this to me. He had wrapped my injured ribs with careful hands and offered me his protection without demanding anything I was not prepared to give. For the very first time since my mother had received her diagnosis, I was no longer fighting this battle alone. And that feeling was worth any price that Dante might eventually ask me to pay. I drifted off to sleep listening to the sound of him counting cash and making phone calls, his voice a low, threatening rumble that promised violence to anyone who might dare to threaten anything that belonged to him. Tomorrow, I would allow myself to worry about the situation I had walked into. Tonight, I just allowed myself to finally rest. 3 days later, I was standing inside the apartment above Dante's club, just staring at the beautiful space that had somehow become my own. The doctor had confirmed that I had 2 cracked ribs, but thankfully nothing more severe. He had bandaged me up correctly and given me industrial-strength pain medication that actually did its job. Dante had also hired a moving company to gather my few belongings from my small studio apartment in Pilsen, all of which fit neatly into 6 small boxes, and had them delivered before I even had a chance to object. The apartment itself was absolutely breathtaking. It featured exposed brick walls, windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling with a view of the South Loop, a modern kitchen with appliances I had only ever seen in lifestyle magazines, and a bedroom that was larger than my entire previous apartment. It felt like it belonged to a completely different life, a life where I was not constantly counting pennies and fighting in dirty basement rings just to afford groceries. The locks are all biometric, Dante explained to me, as he demonstrated the advanced security system installed on the front door. It requires your fingerprint plus a special code that only you and I will ever know. The windows are completely bulletproof, and there is a panic button located in every single room that sends an alert directly to my personal phone. Bulletproof windows, I repeated slowly, trying to fully comprehend the extraordinary level of security he had put in place. That seems a little extreme for a simple bartender. Dante turned around to look at me. In the afternoon sun that was streaming through those reinforced windows, I could see him with perfect clarity. I saw the sharp angle of his jaw, a faint scar just above his left eyebrow, and the way his tailored dress shirt stretched tightly across his broad shoulders. He had rolled up his sleeves, which revealed the intricate tattoos that covered his forearms. They were a mix of Italian words I could not understand and detailed images of ravens and roses. You are not just a bartender any longer, sailor. You are now someone that Marcus Donovan wants dead, which means you require serious protection. And you are also someone who now works for me, which means that your personal safety is a direct reflection of my own reputation. He stepped closer, and I once again smelled that rich, woodsy cologne. Besides all that, I prefer to keep my investments in one piece. Is that all I am to you? An investment? You are whatever you need to tell yourself you are in order to accept my assistance. His hand came up again, his fingers lightly tracing a path down my arm, and I tried to fight the goosebumps that rose in their wake. A fighter, a bartender, an investment, mine. The possessiveness contained in that final word should have set off alarm bells. Instead, I found myself drawn to it, leaning into him, pulled by a force I could not quite identify. Dante, I began to say, but he simply shook his head. I have a meeting I need to attend in an hour. Get yourself settled in. Make sure you take your pain medication and give those ribs a chance to heal. Tomorrow evening, we will begin your actual training. What actual training? His smile was predatory and sharp. If you are going to be working for me, You have to learn how to fight properly, not just rely on street brawling and the dirty tactics used in underground rings. I am going to teach you exactly how to survive in my world." He was gone before I could think of a response, so I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking my few possessions and trying my best not to imagine what surviving in his world would actually require of me. The following night, Dante escorted me down to a private gym located in the basement of his building. It was easily 3 times the size of any underground place I had ever trained in, filled with professional-grade equipment, spotless floors, and bright lighting that actually worked. There were no blood-stained mats or broken pieces of equipment in this place. "Show me what Marcus taught you," Dante instructed, as he leaned casually against the far wall with his arms crossed over his chest. He had changed into athletic clothing, black pants, and a tight-fitting shirt that highlighted every single muscle, making him look exactly like the predator I knew that he was. I walked over to the heavy bag and began to go through my combinations, starting with a jab, a cross, a hook, and an uppercut. The motions were automatic and smooth despite my bandaged ribs, as muscle memory took complete control. I had spent the last 3 years of my life perfecting these specific sequences, learning how to strike hard and fast just to stay alive. Dante observed me in complete silence for a full 10 minutes before he finally pushed himself off the wall. "Stop." I turned to face him, breathing heavily. "What is the problem?" "Everything is the problem." He stepped into the ring with me, circling me slowly as if he were sizing up his prey. "Your stance is far too wide, which leaves you completely open to leg sweeps. Your guard always drops after the third punch in any of your combinations. You telegraph your right hook by dipping your shoulder, and you are favoring your uninjured side so much that anyone paying attention would know the exact spot to hit to take you down." Heat washed over my cheeks. I have won 30 fights with that technique against other amateurs in underground rings, where the biggest prize is $3,000 and bragging rights. Dante moved behind me, his hands landing on my hips, adjusting my posture. "I am teaching you to fight against professionals, against people who fight for their lives, not just for show." His touch was like electricity, even through my clothing. I tried to focus on his instructions instead of the heat from his body right behind mine. "Feet closer together," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Power originates from your core, not from having a wide base. You are a woman fighting against men twice your size. You cannot depend on strength. You need to use speed, precision, and the element of surprise." He moved my arms, fixing my guard. "Higher. Protect your face at all times. Marcus taught you how to brawl, but I am teaching you how to win." For 2 solid hours, we worked on fundamentals. He had me practice my stance, my footwork, and my defensive posture over and over. Dante was a merciless instructor, pointing out every single error and forcing me to react faster, even with my ribs screaming in protest. When we finally finished, I was completely soaked in sweat. The pain medication had worn off, and a deep ache pulsed from my left side. "That is enough," Dante declared, throwing a towel at me. "You are favoring those ribs far too much. We will resume when they have healed." I tried to argue. "I am fine." Standing straight was an exercise in agony, but I refused to show it. Dante just lifted an eyebrow. Then, with blinding speed, he feigned a jab directly at my injury. I flinched back so hard I lost my balance. He caught me before I hit the floor, his strong arms circling my waist. "You are not fine," he murmured, his voice holding an unexpected note of tenderness. "And pushing yourself before you are healed is only going to make things worse. I need you functional, sailor, not broken." I attempted a joke, but my voice came out shaky and raw. "You sound like you actually care." Dante's grip on me tightened, and he lowered his head so our foreheads were almost touching. "I told you before, I do not allow people to harm what belongs to me. That rule includes you harming yourself." His phone buzzed before I could think of a reply. He let me go, a clear reluctance in the movement, and glanced at the screen. His entire expression hardened into a mask. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "Marcus is staging a fight at Sal's gym tonight. A lot of money is changing hands. It will be crowded." Dante's gaze locked with mine, and I saw a cold calculation forming in their depths. How would you feel about making a public appearance? A cold dread filled my stomach. You want me to go back to that place after everything that happened? I want Marcus to lay eyes on you, he stated. I want him to see that you are alive, that you are healthy, and that you are now under my protection. I want every single fighter and bookie in that building to understand that if they touch you, they will have to answer to me. He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping my face with that disarming gentleness of his. Unless you do not feel ready, I will not force you into a situation you cannot handle. The old sailor would have agreed without a second thought. She would have leaped at the opportunity to prove she was not afraid. But 3 days in Dante's world had taught me a valuable lesson. I was learning that sometimes true strength was admitting your own limitations. My ribs are not healed, I said honestly. If someone decides to start trouble, I will not be able to properly defend myself. You will not have to, he replied. That is my job. His thumb gently stroked my cheekbone, and I felt myself instinctively leaning into his touch. Your only responsibility is to stand next to me and look beautiful. I will take care of the rest. I do not do beautiful, I argued. I do functional and practical. A slow, devastating smile spread across Dante's face. Trust me, sailor. You do beautiful exceptionally well. 2 hours later, I was staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, finding it difficult to recognize the woman looking back at me. Dante had arranged for a stylist, a frighteningly capable woman named Rosa, who had completely transformed me from a back alley fighter into something else. She had put me in tailored black trousers, heeled boots that added 3 inches to my stature, and a silk blouse in a deep green that seemed to make my eyes shine despite the fading bruises. My hair was styled in loose waves, and the makeup was subtle but expertly concealed the worst of my injuries. You look perfect, Rosa announced. Like you could kill a man and not even smudge your mascara. Is that the objective? I asked, my voice thin. Honey, when you step into that gym on the arm of Dante Ravencroft, everyone in that room has to know you are completely untouchable. This look tells them you are dangerous, you are protected, and you are not a person to be trifled with. Dante was waiting for me in the living room. The moment I walked out, the look that crossed his face made my heart skip a beat. He had changed into a charcoal suit over a black shirt with no tie, appearing every bit the lethal predator he truly was. But as his gaze fell on me, his expression transformed. It was a potent mix of possessive pride and a darker, more intense hunger. Sailor, he said, and my name sounded like a rough caress. You are going to make every single man in that room regret ever laying a hand on you. He held out his arm. I took it, trying to ignore the overwhelming sense of rightness I felt being anchored to his side. We drove to Pilsen in his black Mercedes, the city lights blurring past the window. I fought to keep my mind off the last time I was at Sal's gym. The underground arena was overflowing with people when we got there, the air thick with the smell of sweat, testosterone, and the faint metallic scent of blood. A match was in progress in the ring. Two heavyweights were battering each other as the crowd roared and waved betting slips in the air. The instant we walked through the door, a wave of silence spread through the room. Every single head turned toward us. They stared at Dante in his fine suit and at me, standing by his side, undeniably alive and very clearly under his wing. I saw Marcus almost immediately. He was standing close to the ring, and his face turned ghostly white when he saw me. His 3 cronies, the same men who had trapped me in the locker room, tensed up, their hands inching toward weapons they likely were not supposed to be carrying. Dante's hand came to rest on the small of my back, a warm and steady pressure as he guided me through the parting crowd. People moved aside for us as if we were royalty, no one daring to stand between Dante Ravencroft and his destination. We came to a halt directly in front of Marcus. Now that I was closer, I could see the raw fear in his eyes. I could smell his nervous sweat even in the cool air of the gym. Marcus, Dante said, his voice cutting through the noise from the fight. I do believe you have met my new employee. Marcus's gaze flickered between the two of us. She stole from me. She borrowed funds that you had already taken from other people. Dante's tone was light, almost conversational, but it had an edge of pure steel. I have gone over her records, which are remarkably thorough. I am certain the Boxing Commission would be very interested to read them. The color of Marcus's face shifted from pale white to a blotchy red. You cannot threaten me here. This is my gym. This is not a threat, Dante said with a smile that was one of the most menacing things I had ever witnessed. This is a piece of information. Starting tonight, every underground ring in Chicago will know that Sailor Thorne is under my protection. If she suffers so much as a paper cut, I will hold you personally responsible. And Marcus? I do not make my problems disappear in a river. I make people wish that they could. He then addressed the entire room, his voice rising. Does anyone here have an issue with Miss Thorne? Does anyone wish to collect on whatever reward Marcus may have put on her head? This is your chance to say something. There was only silence, a complete and terrified silence. Good. Dante's hand wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his side in a move that was both possessive and protective. I am glad we have reached an understanding. Oh, and Marcus, think of this as your official notice. You have 60 days to vacate every gym you run in Chicago. After that period, your licenses, your permits, and all your backroom deals will become my problem to solve, permanently. We started to walk away, but Marcus's strained voice made us pause. You cannot do this to me. I have connections. I have... Dante pivoted slowly, and the expression on his face sent a chill down my spine. You have nothing that I cannot take away from you. Do not forget that. We walked out of Sal's gym with his hand holding mine, the crowd silently making a path for us. I did not look back. I did not need to see the look on Marcus's face to know that we had won. Inside the car, my hands were trembling. It was a cocktail of adrenaline, relief, and lingering fear coursing through my veins. Are you all right? Dante asked, placing his hand over mine. You just threatened to dismantle a man's entire business on my account, I said softly. That is not. I am not accustomed to anyone protecting me that way. You had better get used to it. He raised my hand to his mouth and pressed a gentle kiss against my bruised knuckles. You belong to me now, sailor. That means your enemies have become my enemies. Your battles are now my battles, and anyone who even considers hurting you is about to find out exactly what that means. His declaration should have terrified me. It should have sent me running for the hills. But as we drove through the Chicago night with his hand firmly holding mine, the only thing I felt was completely and utterly safe. 2 weeks after our visit to Sal's gym, I was covering the afternoon shift at Dante's nightclub when the front door opened, and a woman I had never laid eyes on before entered. She was incredibly striking. I guess she was in her early 30s, dressed in designer clothes with a handbag that was likely worth more than my earnings for 3 entire months, and she had the same piercing dark eyes as Dante. You must be Sailor, she said, sliding onto a bar stool with an effortless grace. I am Lucia, Dante's sister. My hands froze on the glass I was polishing. This had to be the sister he had spoken of, the one who had escaped an abusive boyfriend by breaking into a restaurant kitchen. The woman whose ordeal had fundamentally changed how Dante reacted when he found me bleeding in his establishment. He speaks about you, I managed to say, putting the glass down and extending my hand to her. It is very nice to finally meet you. Lucia's handshake was firm and had a no-nonsense quality. My brother has seemed unusually distracted for the past few weeks. I decided I should come and meet the woman who is responsible. She requested a gin and tonic, and I prepared it just as I would for any other patron, trying to hide the fact that my hands were slightly shaking. Lucia Ravencroft was more than just Dante's sister. She was also his accountant, his advisor, and based on what I had pieced together, one of the very few people whose judgment he truly trusted. He helped you, Lucia stated after a sip of her drink. Just like someone once helped me. That is the reason he brought you into his world. It is why he offered you his protection. I know, I replied, leaning on the bar to meet her direct gaze. He told me your story. He explained how your experience taught him to never turn away when a woman is in need of help. Did he also tell you what became of the man who hurt me? I shook my head, and a sharp, cold smile touched Lucia's lips. My father had him beaten so severely that he spent 6 months in a hospital. After his release, our family ensured he was exiled from Chicago, never to return. We have no mercy for men who harm women. She swirled the contents of her glass, her eyes distant. But Dante is not our father. He is far worse. He is more disciplined, more calculating, and immeasurably more lethal when someone disrespects a boundary he has set. So I have a question for you, Sailor Thorn. Are you truly aware of the situation you have found yourself in? Do you grasp the full weight of what it means to have my brother's protection? I am beginning to understand, I answered truthfully. Each day, I learn a little more about the world your brother inhabits. And what exactly have you discovered? My mind drifted over the last 2 weeks, recalling the training sessions where Dante showed me how to truly fight, his hands lingering on my waist a moment longer than necessary. I remembered the quiet meals in his apartment over the bar, where we discussed everything but the palpable energy growing between us. I thought about the way his gaze held me, as if I were something both precious and incredibly dangerous. I have discovered that your brother is completely different from Marcus or any other man who has ever tried to dominate me. He is undeniably possessive and his protectiveness can feel overwhelming. But not for a single moment has he ever made me feel diminished. He views me as a warrior, not merely a person who needs to be shielded. Lucia observed me for a long, silent moment before a smile touched her lips. That was a good answer, but had it been the wrong one, I would have been forced to warn you to stay far away from my brother. Because it was the right answer, I can now tell you the reality about Dante Ravencraftoft. She leaned closer, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. My brother has never allowed a woman into this part of his life before. He has had other relationships, certainly, but those women were kept entirely separate from his enterprise, his true existence. You are the very first woman he has brought into his private apartment, his bar, and his inner circle. You are the first he has trained with his own hands, defended in public, and acknowledged before all his people. What are you trying to tell me? I am telling you that my brother is developing deep feelings for you, likely with more intensity and speed than he has for anyone before. And when a man like Dante Ravencraftoft falls, he falls without reservation. You will never be free of him, sailor. He will be demanding and possessive, and he will require a loyalty that verges on complete obsession. In exchange, however, he will offer you the very same devotion. You would never feel alone, never feel threatened, and never be without his shield again. My heart began to pound against my recently mended ribs. That sounds like an immense amount of pressure. It is, she agreed. That is precisely why I am here. I needed to ensure you comprehend what you are agreeing to. Because after you belong to him completely, after you accept all that his world entails, there is no exit. Dante does not engage in casual affairs. He is not interested in temporary arrangements. When he takes possession of something, it is his for eternity. Just then, the bar door swung open and Dante entered, freezing for a second when he saw us sitting together. Lucia, I was not expecting you to visit. I wish to meet your new bartender, Lucia replied with an air of innocence, finishing the last of her drink. She prepares an outstanding gin and tonic. You ought to consider increasing her pay. She rose from her seat, placed a kiss on her brother's cheek, and then faced me. It was a genuine pleasure to meet you, sailor. I am certain we will be seeing one another again very soon. Perhaps for Sunday dinner. Dante is never absent from our family's Sunday dinner. She was gone before I could even think of a reply. Dante then walked over to the bar, his gaze intensely searching my face. What did she want to talk to you about? She wanted to be certain I knew what I was getting myself into by being with you. I held his stare without flinching. That you do not do anything that is casual, or for a short time. That when you decide something is yours, you keep it for good. She is not incorrect. Dante's hand reached across the polished wood, his fingers intertwining with mine. I told you that on the very first night we met. You belonged to me, sailor. That fact has not altered. If anything, the feeling has only grown more powerful with each day you have been here. Dante, I began to say, but he silenced me with a shake of his head. I realize this is moving very fast. I am aware you are still recovering and still trying to determine if I am someone you can trust. But there is something I must make you understand. He came around the bar, gently pressing me back against the wall of high-end liquor bottles. For 15 years, I have been constructing my empire. I control properties all over Chicago, possess contacts in every district, and I command the respect of men who are twice my age. But absolutely none of that could have prepared me for the moment I found you bleeding on my floor. His hands rose to cup my face, and I could sense the formidable, restrained power in his touch. You stumbled into my life at 3 in the morning, wounded and defiant, and with a bravery so stunning that I was unable to look away from you. Every single day since that moment, you have confirmed that you are precisely the type of woman I never realized I was missing. I am just a fighter who got in too deep, I whispered. Number. His thumb gently brushed against my lower lip, the simple motion both tender and overwhelming. You are a woman who would take from a criminal to rescue her mother. A woman who would battle her way past 3 trained fighters before she would ever surrender. You are someone who would shatter my window and stare down the barrel of my weapon rather than allow someone else to break her spirit. That is not just a fighter, sailor. That is a person who is truly extraordinary. He drew nearer, resting his forehead against mine, and his warm breath ghosted across my lips. Please tell me you feel this as well. Let me know that I am not the only one feeling this way. I knew I should move back. I should have kept things professional between us. I should have remembered that powerful men like Dante Ravencraftoft were a great danger to women like me. But I was exhausted from running. I was exhausted from fighting by myself. I was exhausted from denying the electric current that passed between us whenever he was near me. You are not alone, I confessed, my hands rising to press flat against his chest. I could feel the powerful and rapid rhythm of his heart beneath my palms. I have no idea what this is or where this is headed, but you are not alone in this. At my words, Dante's composure finally broke. His mouth descended on mine, a kiss that was both a claim and a possession, and it was utterly devastating and perfect. I returned his kiss with the same fierce intensity, pouring months of isolation, terror, and desperation into our connection. His fingers wove into my hair, tilting my head back to deepen the kiss even further. I leaned into him, needing to be closer, needing so much more. When we finally separated for air, both of us breathing heavily, Dante once again rested his forehead on mine. Mine, he breathed, and it was a statement of fact, not a question. Yours, I affirmed, feeling a sense of peace settle deep within my chest with that single word. The sound of the bar door opening shattered the intimate moment. Dante pulled away with fluid grace, his professional demeanor instantly returning, but his hand stayed firmly at my waist, a clear sign of possession and protection. One of his men came inside, a person I knew as Anthony, who was in charge of security at a number of Dante's places. He absorbed the entire scene in a single quick look and had the wisdom to keep his face completely unreadable. Boss, we have an issue developing at the warehouse. Marcus is making threats about taking legal action, and he has retained some high-priced lawyer from downtown to support his claims. Dante's entire expression turned to ice. Marcus is free to hire every lawyer he can find. I possess records of every unsanctioned fight, every single dollar he has skimmed, and every cash payment he has made under the table for the last 5 years. If he desires a legal battle, then we will give him one. He then turned his attention back to me, his hand gently cupping my cheek. I have to go deal with this. You stay here, complete your shift, and do not step outside this building unless you have security with you. Understood? Understood. I grabbed his hand just before he could retract it. Be careful. A hint of warmth returned to his eyes. Always. Now I have a very important reason to come back. He departed with Anthony, and I passed the remainder of my shift reliving that kiss and my admission. I kept seeing the way he had looked at me, as if I was the only thing that mattered in his entire world. That evening, as I lay in bed in the apartment situated above the bar, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Dante. I cannot sleep. You are on my mind. I stared at the words for a long time before typing my own response. Same here. His reply came back in an instant. Come down. There is something I need to show you. I slipped into a pair of sweatpants and a tank top, then walked barefoot down the private stairway that linked my apartment to Dante's office. The bar was closed for the night with the lights turned low, and I found him there in the main room. He was waiting with an open bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I thought you had business at the warehouse to take care of, I said, taking the glass he held out to me. That is handled. The moment Marcus's lawyer saw the proof I had, he told his client to immediately drop any legal threats. Dante led me toward one of the deep leather booths and slid in right next to me. This means we must discuss what comes next. What comes next? Marcus is trapped. His entire operation is failing. His fighters are already moving to different gyms, and his name is ruined. Trapped animals are the most unpredictable kind, sailor. He is going to try something desperate. And I have to know that you are protected. I have security guards. I have this apartment. I have you. I took a sip of the wine, feeling the rich red liquid warm my throat. What other protection could I possibly need? Dante placed his hand on my thigh, its warmth seeping through the fabric of my sweatpants. I want you to stop working at the bar during the day. You should stay here, in the apartment. We can train together at night, and you can let me manage all the public parts of the business until Marcus is dealt with for good. You want me to go into hiding? I stated, my voice flat. I want you to be safe. His grip on my leg tightened. There is a very important difference. I placed my wine glass on the table and shifted to face him directly. For 3 years, I fought men who were twice my size in illegal fighting rings. I survived the ambush from Marcus, and I walked away with only cracked ribs and a bruised eye. I am not a fragile person, Dante, and I refuse to hide away in your apartment like some helpless woman waiting for a hero to save her. I never suggested you were fragile. His free hand came up, gently cupping my face. But you are my responsibility to protect, and that is a duty I take with the utmost seriousness. If anything were to happen to you because I allowed you to work without protection, nothing is going to happen to me, I cut in. You have made it perfectly clear to every person in Chicago that I am under your watch. Marcus would have to be out of his mind to attempt anything against me now. That is precisely what makes me so concerned. Marcus has absolutely nothing left to lose. I examined his face in the faint light of the bar, and I could see real fear hiding beneath his composed expression. This is not just about keeping me safe, is it? This is about having control. You have a need to know my location, to know what I am doing, to be certain I am safe during every single moment of the day. Yes, Dante confessed, while his thumb gently stroked my cheekbone. I need that. Is that an irrational feeling? It probably is. Is it going too far? Without a doubt. But I cannot seem to turn it off, sailor. You are constantly in my thoughts. And the idea of you getting hurt again? His voice grew heavy with emotion. I simply cannot allow that to happen. I leaned into his hand, feeling the intensity of his need for control, but now I saw it for what it truly was. It was not about dominance. It was born from desperation. What if we found a compromise? I will continue to work at the bar, but only during the afternoon shifts when you are also here. At night, I will either stay in the apartment or I will train with you. I will check in with you on a regular basis. I will not go anywhere by myself. And I will permit your security team to follow me. Dante's eyes searched my own for any hesitation. You would truly do that? You would give up that amount of your freedom. It is not about giving up my freedom. It is about finally accepting that there is someone who genuinely cares if I live or if I die. I took his hand in mine, pressing it more firmly against my cheek. And besides, you are not the only one who is feeling scared. Marcus has nothing to lose, which I know makes him incredibly dangerous. I do not want to be foolish when it comes to my own safety." "You could never be foolish," Dante murmured softly. And then he was kissing me once more, with more gentleness this time, but with the same powerful intensity. His hands found my waist, lifting me without any effort, until I was sitting on his lap in the booth. I wrapped my arms around his neck, getting completely lost in the sensation and taste of him. When we finally pulled away from each other, we were both breathing heavily. Dante's eyes were dark with a mixture of desire and something far more profound. "Stay with me tonight." "Not upstairs in your apartment. Stay here with me." I understood exactly what he was asking. I knew what it would signify to take that step. Dante clarified, "Just to sleep." But the way his hands rested on my waist suggested something entirely different. "I just want to hold you. I want to wake in the morning with the knowledge that you are safe. That is all, unless you happen to want more." I really should have said no. I should have kept a clear boundary between us. But the honest truth was, I wanted this just as much as he did. I wanted to fall asleep in his arms. I wanted to wake up beside him. I wanted to give up fighting the powerful connection that had been growing between us since the night I shattered his window. "Okay," I whispered, "just to sleep." A slow, devastating smile spread across Dante's face as he got to his feet, lifting me up with him. "Liar," he murmured against my lips, "but for now, I will accept what you are offering." He carried me up the private stairs to his own apartment, which I had never entered before. It was much larger and more luxurious than mine. He placed me on his enormous bed with a surprising tenderness. He then removed his clothes down to his boxer briefs and slid into the bed next to me, pulling me close against his chest. "This is only sleeping," I protested, but my voice was weak. I was intensely aware of the warmth of his skin next to mine. "Absolutely," Dante replied, as his hand slipped beneath my tank top to rest on the bare skin of my waist. "Just sleeping, with my hand on your skin, in my bed, right where you belong." A small laugh escaped me as I curled into his embrace, feeling more secure and content than I had in many years. "You are an impossible man." "I am your man," he corrected, placing a soft kiss on the top of my head. "Get some rest now, sailor. Tomorrow, we are going to finish what Marcus began." I drifted off to sleep in the arms of Dante Ravencroft, with the sound of his steady heartbeat in my ear. For the first time since my mother's illness was diagnosed, I felt like everything might actually turn out to be all right. I awoke to bright sunlight pouring through massive floor-to-ceiling windows, with Dante's arm resting heavily over my waist. Sometime in the night, I had shifted toward him, my face now resting against his bare chest and one of my legs tangled with his. He was still asleep, and his normally intense features were soft and relaxed. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead, making him look younger and far less intimidating. I used the quiet moment to study him without interruption. I traced the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar over his eyebrow that I had seen before, and the complex tattoos that covered his arms and his chest. Being this close, I could make out the Italian words more clearly. "La familia è tutto." Family is everything. "You are staring," Dante said in a low murmur, his voice still thick with sleep and his eyes remaining closed. "I have to admit, you are worth looking at," I confessed, and my cheeks immediately burned with heat. His dark, warm eyes opened, and his grip on my waist grew firmer. "Stay right here," he murmured. "Let me have this one moment before the day begins, and everything becomes complicated all over again." So I remained still, allowing him to hold me close. I could feel his heart beating steadily beneath my hand, and I tried to ignore how perfectly right it all felt. It would be so easy to fall completely for this man. In just 3 weeks, he had shown me more genuine care than I had known in years. "My mother wants to see you," I said softly. "She called me yesterday. When I told her I had moved, she said she wants to see my new apartment. and to meet you. Dante's hand shifted, cupping the back of my head as his fingers wove into my hair. What did you tell her about me? That I am your employer? That I offered help when you were in need? That you are... I hesitated, unable to find the right word for what Dante had become to me. That I am yours, he finished for me, his voice a gentle whisper. Tell her the truth, sailor. Let her know you are with the most dangerous man in all of Chicago, and that he would set this city on fire before allowing anyone to harm you again. That might frighten her, I replied. Good, he said. She should be afraid for you. This world I am bringing you into is not a safe place. It is a violent, ruthless, and unforgiving world, but I can promise you this one thing. As long as you belong to me, you will never have to face it by yourself. His phone vibrated on the bedside table, shattering the peaceful moment. Dante reached for it, and his face grew dark as he scanned the screen. What is it? I asked, sitting up in bed. Marcus has finally made his move. 3 of my businesses were vandalized during the night. They broke windows, destroyed all the inventory, and left threatening messages. Dante was already dressing, his movements swift and efficient. He is trying to provoke me into a confrontation. So what are you going to do about it? I asked. Dante turned and looked directly at me. The man who had held me with such tenderness just moments ago was gone. In his place stood the feared Mafia boss of Chicago. He was cold, calculating, and absolutely lethal. I'm going to give him exactly what he is asking for, he stated. A confrontation, but it will be on my terms, on my own ground, and following my own set of rules. He walked back over to the bed, framing my face with both of his hands. You will stay here today. I will have security posted right outside the door. There will be no exceptions. This entire situation ends tonight, sailor. One way or another, it is over. Let me go with you, I insisted, grabbing onto his wrists. I can be of help. I understand Marcus's tactics and his patterns of behavior. No. The single word was final and absolute. You are not going anywhere near that man. I will not put you at risk, not for something like this. This whole thing started because of me, I argued. It is because I took that money from him, because I desperately needed it for my mother's medical treatments. I should be there when it all comes to an end. Dante's jaw clenched tightly. This stopped being about you the instant Marcus chose to hunt you down like an animal in my city. This is now between him and me. It is a matter of respect, of territory, and about him understanding the consequences of touching what belongs to me. You do not need to be present for that lesson. He kissed me then, a hard, possessive, and final kiss before he pulled away. Stay here. I am serious, sailor. Do not leave this apartment. He was gone before I had a chance to argue any further, the door shutting behind him with a sound of terrible finality. I spent the morning pacing the length of the apartment and training in the private gym, trying desperately to burn away the anxious energy that surged through my veins. Dante had stationed a pair of security guards outside my door, 2 silent professional men who almost certainly carried firearms beneath their tailored suits. Sometime around noon, my phone began to ring. It was an unknown number. I nearly ignored it, but a sudden impulse made me answer. Sailor Thorne. The voice on the other end was a woman's. It sounded professional and completely unfamiliar. This is Dr. Chen from Northwestern Memorial. I am calling in regard to your mother. My heart felt like it stopped beating. What is wrong? Is she all right? She is in stable condition, but she is asking for you. There has been a complication with her treatment, and she has become quite upset. She specifically asked for you to come to the hospital. I will be there in 20 minutes, I promised, already reaching for my jacket. I managed to get past Dante's security guards with a lie, telling them I was just running down to the bar to check on something. From there, I slipped out through a rear exit and hailed a taxi to Northwestern Memorial. The hospital felt like familiar ground. I had spent countless months there during my mother's treatment, so I knew the corridors and waiting areas as well as I knew my own apartment. I located her room on the oncology floor, pushed the door open, and walked straight into the trap that Marcus had set. He was standing there with two of his men, and my mother was nowhere to be seen. The room was completely empty except for the three of them, and I understood with a sickening clarity that the call from Dr. Chen had never actually happened. "I really thought you were smarter than this," Marcus sneered as he moved to block my only exit. "But I suppose everyone has a weakness, and yours is clearly your mother." I slowly backed away, my mind racing to consider my defensive options. The room was cramped, I was outnumbered 2-1, and my ribs were still in the process of healing. I knew I could not fight my way out of this situation. "Dante is going to kill you," I said, forcing a confidence into my voice that I did not feel. "You have to know that, right? The very moment he discovers that you laid a hand on me. You are a dead man." "Perhaps," he conceded. "But first, I am going to make you pay for ruining my operation. After that, I will use you as leverage to make Ravencroft back down. He wants you? That is fine. He can have you after I am finished." Marcus started to move toward me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I pressed the panic button on my watch. It was the one Dante had given me on my first day in the apartment, the one that sent a signal directly to his personal phone and his security team. And then I started to fight. My first punch landed squarely on Marcus's throat, which bought me a few precious seconds. His associate charged at me from the left, and I used his own momentum against him, sending him crashing into a cart of hospital equipment. But the second man was larger and quicker. He wrapped his arms around my waist and lifted me completely off the ground. A burst of pain shot through my still healing ribs as he violently slammed me against the wall. I drove my elbow backward into his face and felt the crunch of cartilage, but his grip did not loosen. Marcus was staggering to his feet, his face a mask of pure fury, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was completely out of options. Just then, the door imploded inward. Dante stormed through the doorway like a force of nature, with 4 members of his security team right behind him. His eyes found me instantly, taking in the entire situation in a single glance, and the expression on his face was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. "Let her go." Each word he spoke was laced with barely contained violence. The man holding me hesitated for a fraction of a second, and that brief moment of indecision was all Dante required. He moved with deadly speed, tearing me from the man's grasp and positioning me safely behind him in one seamless motion. He then drove his fist into the associate's face with enough power to send the man crashing backward through the hospital room's large observation window. What happened next was both brutal and incredibly efficient. Dante's security team quickly subdued Marcus's other man, while Dante himself focused all his attention on Marcus. He did not use a weapon. He did not need one. His fists delivered punishment with the precision of a surgeon, each strike carefully calculated to inflict maximum pain without being fatal. "You," Dante snarled between blows, "put your hands," another devastating punch landed, "on what is mine." He was going to kill him. I could see the cold fury in every one of his movements. He was showing absolutely no mercy. Marcus was barely conscious now, with blood streaming from his mouth and nose, but Dante showed no sign of stopping. "Dante," I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. "Stop it! He is not worth this." Dante turned to face me, and for one heart-stopping moment, I was not sure if he even recognized who I was. Then his eyes focused, truly seeing me for the first time, and the murderous rage slowly drained from his expression. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his hands immediately checking me over for any injuries. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed. "Sailor, tell me, did he touch you?" "I am all right. My ribs are aching, but I am all right." I cupped his face with my hands, forcing him to look at me instead of at Marcus's broken form on the floor. "I am okay, because you came for me, because you saved me." Dante pulled me tightly against his chest, his arms wrapping around me with a desperate intensity. "You promised me you would stay in the apartment. You gave me your word." "He called me," I explained. "He pretended to be a doctor and said that my mother needed me. I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry. Never apologize for loving your mother, Dante whispered, his lips pressing against the top of my head. But God, sailor, when I received your panic signal, when I figured out where you were, his arms tightened around me. I have never been so scared in my entire life. Boss, one of his security team said, stepping forward, the police are on their way. We need to leave now. Dante nodded but did not let me go. Anthony, take Marcus and his men to the warehouse. Make it clear to them what happens to people who dare to touch my woman. Then, ensure they are out of Chicago by tonight. I do not care where they end up, as long as it is a long way from here. What about the hospitals? I asked in a low voice. Marcus needs medical care. He will receive it after he signs over every single property, every asset, and every connection he has in this city to me. Then he gets patched up and put on a bus out of the state. Dante's voice was cold and final. He is fortunate that I am letting him live at all. We exited the hospital through a rear service door, easily avoiding the arriving police cars. Once we were in Dante's car, I finally began to tremble as the adrenaline crash hit me with full force. Dante pulled me against his side, wrapping one arm securely around my shoulders, holding me together as I started to fall apart. I could have gotten you killed, I whispered, if you had arrived just a minute later. But I did not, he interrupted. You fought him off, you bought yourself time, and you trusted that I would come for you. That is all that matters. Back at the apartment, Dante refused to let me out of his sight. He examined my ribs himself, carefully rewrapping the bandages. He gave me some painkillers and then simply held me on the couch as I tried to process everything that had just happened. It is all over, he whispered into my hair. Marcus is finished. His entire operation now belongs to me. Everyone in the underground fighting world knows that you are under my protection. You are finally safe, sailor. You can finally stop running. What happens if I do not know how to stop? I asked in a quiet voice. What if I have been fighting and running for so many years that I have forgotten how to just feel safe? Dante pulled back slightly so he could look at me, his hands gently framing my face. In that case, I will teach you. Every single day, I will show you what it feels like to be protected, to be treasured, and to be mine. And in time, you will start to believe it. I am falling for you, I admitted, the confession spilling from my lips before I had a chance to hold it back. I realize this is fast and it is probably insane, but I am falling for you, Dante, and it terrifies me more than anything. His smile was slow and utterly devastating. Good, because I started falling for you the moment you broke my window. You were bleeding and defiant, and so beautiful that it made my chest physically ache. I have just been waiting for you to catch up. He kissed me then, a kiss that was soft and sweet and absolutely perfect. And I kissed him back, pouring 3 long weeks of fear and hope and a desperate sense of longing into the powerful connection between us. I love you, Dante whispered, his lips brushing against mine. I realize it is much too soon and this is probably far too intense. But I love you, Sailor Thorn. And I plan to spend every day for the rest of my life making certain that you never have a reason to doubt it. That kind of declaration should have frightened me. I should have pulled away, but instead, I leaned closer into him. I let him hold me tight and whispered back, I love you too. That night, we did more than just sleep together. We made love, slowly and with great care. Dante was very mindful of my healing ribs, and his hands felt reverent as they moved over my skin. Afterward, as I lay there in his arms, I at last understood what Lucia had tried to tell me. Dante Ravencroft did not do anything casual. He was not interested in anything temporary. When he loved with his whole being, with obsession, and for all time. And I was ready for that. I was ready for every part of it. 6 months later, I stood inside what had once been Sal's gym in Pilsen, watching as the contractors worked to transform the entire space into something new and different. Dante was right beside me, his hand resting on the small of my back. It felt warm, familiar, And exactly right. Are you positive about this? He asked, for the third time just that morning. I am absolutely sure. I pressed against his side, our attention focused on the blueprints covering a makeshift table. The Diamond Women's Boxing Academy. It was going to be a sanctuary where women could train without fear, learning to protect themselves, finally safe from predators like Marcus. Dante's arms slid around my waist, and I could feel his deep satisfaction in the gesture. Following Marcus's forced departure from Chicago, with documents signed transferring his entire operation to Dante, we spent months dismantling his corrupt world. The illicit fighting rings were gone or made legitimate. His gyms were sold or completely repurposed. This very place, where I'd spent 3 agonizing years just trying to survive, was now becoming a place that would truly empower women. Your mother would be proud, Dante murmured near my ear, and I couldn't help but smile. My mother met him a week after the hospital incident and was initially horrified. He was the exact man she had always warned me about. But then she saw the gentle way he looked at me, a softness that defied his dangerous reputation, and she finally understood. He is making sure you are safe, she told me later, squeezing my hand tightly. That is the only thing that matters to me. Her cancer was now in complete remission, and Dante's insurance contacts had handled all her medical expenses, which I knew was his way of paying for them himself. He had also moved her into a much nicer apartment, and she now spent her days volunteering at the very hospital that had treated her. Have you chosen the instructors yet? Dante inquired, his eyes still on the plans. I plan to teach the introductory classes myself. I am also recruiting some of the women I used to fight alongside, the ones who escaped the underground scene and built legitimate careers. They should have an opportunity to contribute, to show the next generation how to be strong. And as for the building security, I gave a slight roll of my eyes. It is as extreme as ever, but I have approved all of your measures. Guards will be on duty during the evening classes. Cameras will monitor all common spaces, and every single room will have a panic button. You will always know I am secure when I am here. Dante gently turned me to face him, his hands resting on my hips. In the 6 months since Marcus was removed from Chicago, we had settled into a comfortable routine. My mornings were spent working at his bar, my afternoons were for training women privately, and my evenings belonged to him. We were living in his apartment full-time, although he maintained my old place as a separate office for me to manage the academy's paperwork. I cannot help it, he confessed, softly moving a stray piece of hair from my cheek. Protecting you has become part of who I am now. Besides, you owe me something, do you not remember? My hand instinctively went to my stomach, which was still flat, though that would soon change. I remember. We learned I was pregnant 2 weeks ago, already 12 weeks along, but we had not shared the news with anyone. This revelation had elevated Dante's protective nature to an entirely new level, one that might have been overwhelming if it was not so clearly born from love. Twins, he whispered, his hand covering mine over my belly. 2 babies. My doctor mentioned it is common for families with your genetic history. Your doctor also confirmed that I am in perfect health and can maintain my usual routine with a few adjustments. I rose onto my toes to kiss him. Which is to say, you can cease your attempts to encase me in bubble wrap. I am making no such promises, he replied, but his kiss was tender and sweet. I could feel his smile pressed against my own lips. You are carrying my children, sailor. I am permitted to be overprotective. You are always overprotective. That is true, but now I have an excellent reason. Lucia entered the doorway then, holding mugs of coffee and looking completely like the powerful businesswoman she had become. Are you two finished being so sickeningly sweet? We have a contract meeting in 20 minutes. We are never finished being sickeningly sweet, Dante retorted. But he let me go and went to the table where Lucia was arranging more papers. I observed them as they worked, a brother and sister team, debating business with the same sharp intellect. I was amazed at how my entire existence had shifted. 6 months prior, I was bleeding, desperate, and shattering windows in the darkness. Now I was launching my own academy, expecting twins, and deeply in love with a man who had reordered his whole universe just to keep me safe. Sailor, Lucia called out, I need your signature on these insurance forms. I walked over to the table and reviewed the documents carefully before I signed. The academy was covered for every possible scenario: fires, robberies, injuries, and even natural disasters. Dante had ensured nothing was overlooked. Have you considered any names? Lucia inquired with a casual tone, though her gaze was sharp with interest. I looked over at Dante, who simply shrugged. We were planning to wait before telling anyone. Oh, please, I have seen the way my brother looks at you. I suspected you were pregnant before you did, Lucia said with a grin. Besides, I intend to be the favorite aunt. That requires getting involved from the very beginning. If we have boys, I was thinking of Italian names, I offered, to honor Dante's family heritage. If they are girls, I want to name them after strong women that I have known. And what if we have one of each? Dante asked. Then we will find a compromise, just like we do with everything else. I leaned into him, feeling his warmth and strength, and the complete certainty that he would guard our expanding family with the same ferocity he had used to protect me. When the construction crew came back from their lunch, we spent the rest of the afternoon confirming the final details for the academy. By the time evening arrived, my feet were sore and my back was aching, something Dante noticed right away. Home, he said with quiet authority. You will put your feet up, I will have dinner brought in, and you are going to bed early. I am pregnant, not an invalid, I protested, but I still allowed him to lead me toward his car. You are both, he corrected me, opening the passenger side door with the gentleness of someone handling a priceless treasure. And I love you for it. Later that night, as I was curled in our bed with Dante's hand resting on my stomach, my mind drifted back over the series of events that brought me to this very moment. It all began with that act of desperate theft, the ensuing violence that led me to his doorstep, and the slow journey through fear and trust to the gradual realization that safety can be found in the most unlikely of places. What are you thinking about? Dante asked, his thumb drawing slow circles on my skin. That I broke your window and somehow found my home, I replied softly. That the man everyone is afraid of is the kindest soul I know. That you transformed the worst night of my life into the start of every good thing that has happened since. Dante shifted his weight, propping himself up on an elbow to gaze down at me. In the faint glow from the city lights outside, his dark eyes seemed warm and endless. I told you that very first night, you are mine, sailor. That fact has not changed. If anything, the feeling has only grown stronger with each day we have spent together. I know, I feel the same way. This, I motioned to the space between us. This was not what I ever expected, but it was exactly what I needed. You are what I needed. He kissed me then, a slow, deep, and perfect kiss, with his hand still protectively on my belly, where our children were growing. I love you, he whispered against my mouth. I love our babies. I love this life that we are building. And I give you my word, Sailor Thorn, I will spend the rest of my existence making certain you never feel regret for shattering my window that night. I could never regret it. You rescued me, Dante, in every single way a person can be rescued. We rescued each other, he corrected, pulling me in closer. You were in need of protection, and I was in need of someone worth protecting, someone who could see beyond the reputation and the danger to the man I really am, someone who was brave enough to break my window and strong enough to capture my heart. I drifted off to sleep in his embrace, feeling more secure and cherished than I had ever thought was possible. The next morning, I awoke to find Dante already up, watching me with that familiar, intense focus that I now recognized as him contemplating our future. It was then that I grasped a profound truth. Love was not meant to be effortless. It was not supposed to be straightforward, or safe, or predictable. Sometimes, love arrives at 3 o'clock in the morning, wounded and desperate, shattering glass to get inside. Sometimes it comes dressed in expensive suits, carrying weapons, and controlling empires. Sometimes it requires everything you have: trust, vulnerability, and the sheer courage to finally stop running. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to welcome it, love completely changes everything. It can turn gyms into academies, danger into safety, and fear into a feeling of home. 8 months later, I was standing inside that very academy, 7 months pregnant with twins who kicked relentlessly, teaching a class of 20 women the fundamentals of self-defense. Dante observed from the back of the room, having abandoned any pretense that he would not be hovering over me for the remainder of my pregnancy. After the training session ended, he walked over holding a bottle of water and a protein bar. "You have to eat," he insisted. "The babies require their nourishment." "And the babies require their father to calm down," I shot back, though I accepted the snacks he offered. "We are doing just fine, Dante. I am fine. The medical team says I am the most robust pregnant patient they have had in months. That is only because I make sure you get enough rest, eat the right foods, and do not push yourself too hard." He led me toward a chair, then knelt down in front of me to untie my training sneakers. "Your feet are getting swollen." "My feet are always swollen. I am 31 weeks along with twins. Every part of me is swollen." But I allowed him to massage them anyway, because beneath all the excessive worry, Dante's care was sincere and gentle, and it was precisely what I needed. "Just 1 month until the Academy's grand opening," he mentioned, concentrating on my left foot. "Are you certain you want to be present for that? The babies might arrive ahead of schedule. The Academy will open on time whether I am there or not, but my intention is to be there. This is my lifelong dream, Dante. Our shared dream. I am not going to miss it over some swollen ankles and a sore back." He gazed up at me, and the deep love shining in his eyes stole my breath. "You are incredible. Do you realize that? Most women would be taking it easy at home, getting ready for childbirth. But you are out here, teaching other women how to defend themselves, creating something that will truly make a difference." "I had the best teacher," I whispered, gently holding his face in my hands. "You are the one who showed me that deep trauma can be reshaped into a powerful purpose. You proved that violence can be met with protection, and that our darkest nights can lay the groundwork for our brightest future." Dante rose to his feet, bringing me up with him and wrapping me in his arms. My pregnant stomach rested against his body, our babies moving between us, and I could feel his smile in my hair. "I love you," he murmured. "I love this family we have. I love the entire life we have constructed from shattered windows and late-night rescues. And I give you my word, sailor, our children will be raised knowing their mother is the strongest, most courageous, and most beautiful woman I have ever encountered. And their father," I added, "is the man who saw a bleeding stranger and recognized someone worth saving, worth protecting, and worth loving for all time." We just stood there, inside the empty academy, embracing each other, two souls who had discovered their home in the most unlikely of circumstances. And when our twins finally arrived 3 weeks later, a perfect boy and a perfect girl, both healthy and cherished beyond all words, we gave them the names Hope and Justice. We chose those names because that is precisely what we had built together. Hope for a much better future, and justice for every woman who had ever endured the kind of pain I had. It all began with a broken window, a man who seemed dangerous, and one simple question he asked me: "Who hurt your face?" I came to understand that the answer to that question was never as important as everything that happened afterward. The safety he provided, the love he gave, the transformation of violence into something beautiful and strong. Dante Ravencroft had asked who hurt my face, and then he dedicated the rest of his life to guaranteeing that nobody could ever hurt me again. That was the real story. It was not about the breaking, but about the mending. It was not about the danger, but about the safety that followed. It was not about the fear, but about the love that defeated it completely.